Even though it was a typical Tuesday afternoon, the home was completely still, with the exception of the gentle hum that came from the refrigerator in the kitchen. Due to the fact that my mother was out running errands and my step-sibling, Jake, was just coming back from work, I had spent the majority of the day at home by myself. We hadn't seen one another very much as of late since Jake's work schedule had become more hectic, and we had been spending most of our time by ourselves. My relationship with Jake had never been particularly harmonious, at least not in the conventional sense. Even though we never got into a fight, there was always a tension between us, something that was never spoken. The fact that we had been living together for the previous 2 years and that they were my step-sibling via marriage did not change the fact that I always got the impression that there was a distance between us. Perhaps it was due to the fact that we were too dissimilar to one another, or perhaps it was because we were both aware that something had been percolating between us for some time, something that neither of us had ever addressed. When I was waiting for the water to boil, I was standing in the kitchen, browsing through my phone without paying attention to what I was doing. Making spaghetti was a simple activity that I was doing to divert my attention away from the strange energy that I had been experiencing throughout the day. The home had a weighty feeling, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. I had heard them go directly to their room without any words or welcomes, despite the fact that Jake had been home a bit earlier than he normally would have. However, that was nothing out of the ordinary for them, it was simply how we were. As I was thinking about something, I was distracted by the sound of footsteps approaching down the corridor. There was no need for me to glance in order to recognize Jake. Their steps were easily identifiable, they were deliberate and slow. There was something about them that made it difficult to ignore them, regardless of how hard I tried to ignore them. Despite the fact that I was not looking at them, I was able to sense their entrance inside the room. "You making something?" Jake spoke in a manner that seemed nonchalant, but there was a hint of apprehension in his tone, which caused my stomach to churn. In an effort to maintain my composure, I cast a quick glance in their direction. "Just a little bit of spaghetti. Would you like some?" With a shrug, they moved closer to me and leaned on the counter that was directly across from me. Despite the fact that they appeared to be more comfortable than normal, their eyes were keen, and they were observing me in a manner that caused my rate to quicken somewhat. Jake was a few years older than I was, and they had always been more self-assured and outspoken than I had ever been. They went about their business with an air of effortless assurance. "I might have some," they murmured, their eyes darting back and forth between the kettle of boiling water and me. "I might have some. You've been quiet lately." I simply shrugged my shoulders and turned around to stir the spaghetti since I was at a loss for words in response to that. "Yeah, I guess." Despite the fact that we were not physically touching one another, I was able to sense the heat emanating from their body behind me as Jake inched closer to me. Without my knowledge, they were getting closer and closer until they were right there, so near that I could almost feel their breath on the back of my neck. They had a way of closing the space without me even noticing it. I felt a tingling sensation on my skin. "Are you okay?" they inquired, their tone becoming more solemn and lowering their volume. However, I made an effort to ignore the fact that it sent a shiver down my spine. "Yeah, I'm fine," I responded, making an effort to maintain a steady tone in my voice. Why wouldn't I be? However, Jake did not respond immediately. Rather than that, they leaned over my shoulder and glanced down at the pot of spaghetti as their arm lightly touched mine. In spite of the fact that the touch was short, it was plenty to get my heart pounding. Because of the way they moved and the fact that they were so at ease in my space, it was difficult to breathe. There was something about the way they moved that. Jake continued, their voice getting closer to my ear, as if something has been upsetting you. "You've just seemed off lately," Jake said. In an effort to concentrate on the work at hand, I forced myself to take a deep breath and swallow, but it was impossible to ignore the way that their presence was overloading each and every one of my senses. I was aware of the heat emanating from behind me, as well as the weight of their stare on the side of my face, and it was nearly impossible for me to resist the want to turn around and confront them. "I'm fine," I said, despite the fact that my voice did not sound as convincing as I had thought it would. That was the point at which everything began. They moved even closer to me, their chests now brushing against my back as they reached past me to switch off the stove. Jake did not pull away from them, rather, they moved even closer. My breathing became labored as a result of the unexpected proximity, and I experienced a surge of heat that had nothing to do with the warmth emanating from the stove. Their voice was so low that it was practically a whisper as they said, "You don't seem to be doing well. You seem like you've been avoiding me." I was at a loss for words in response to that observation since, in a sense, they were correct. I had been avoiding them previously. There was something about the way things had changed between us, something that was silent but difficult to ignore, and I hadn't confessed it to myself until now, but it was something that I had noticed. It appeared as though the tension had been ramping up for a considerable amount of time, and now it was reaching a peak. Despite the fact that my voice was shaking, I managed to speak the words, "I'm not avoiding you." When their breath brushed against the side of my neck, I could feel the warmth of their breath, and it was driving me absolutely insane. I felt a bolt of electricity course through my body as Jake's hand moved, and their fingertips softly touched my arm. The little touch was enough to activate the electrical impulse. Despite the fact that my mind was racing and my body was betraying me in ways that I was not prepared for, I became rigid and unsure of what to do and how to react. Their voice was gentle, yet it was tinged with something that I couldn't quite pinpoint where it came from. "Are you sure?" they questioned. "Because it feels like you've been keeping your distance." Just enough to cast a glimpse over my shoulder at them, I moved my head ever so slightly, and the sight that was on their faces froze me in my tracks. There was something strong there, something I had never seen before. It wasn't just interest or worry, it was want pure and unadulterated. I had never seen anything like that before. No retreat was made by Jake. Rather than that, they moved closer to me, bringing their lips to within a few inches of my ear. Goosebumps ran down my spine as they muttered, "You don't have to avoid me," and their voice sent goosebumps down my spine. "You don't have to pretend." My thoughts were racing and my pulse was hammering in my chest. I had no control over my thoughts. Despite the fact that this was my step-sibling and the person I had been living with for the last 2 years, I did not feel like they were a member of my family at that time. They gave me the impression of something completely different, something that both frightened and intrigued me at the same time. I whispered, "I'm not pretending," despite the fact that the words sounded without substance. Then, Jake grinned, a languid smile that conveyed his knowledge, and it caused my stomach to flip. They lifted their hand once again, and this time it was softly resting on my hip. I felt a catch in my breath as it went through my neck. The way in which my body was responding to them was something I had not anticipated, and I was at a loss for how to deal with it. They mumbled, "I think you are," with a quiet and soft tone in their voice. "However, it is not a problem. It is no longer necessary for you to act as if." The kitchen appeared to be getting smaller, as if the walls were closing in on me and enclosing me in the present instant. Even though Jake's hand was only barely resting on my hip, I could feel the weight of it, and the warmth of their contact permeate throughout my entire body. The ideas that were running through my head were a tangled mass that I was unable to entirely unravel. And how did we get to this point? What caused something that was so unremarkable to become something so serious, something that I was unable to adequately understand for myself? When Jake's fingers flexed slightly on my hip, I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my chest. I could also hear Jake's fingertips. Their body was close, too close, up against the side of my neck, and their breath was warm on my skin. Despite the fact that they were not touching me in a way that was evident, it was enough to put every nerve on fire. It was impossible for me to move or think. All I could do was stand there, locked in place. I was unable to respond. It was Jake who muttered, "I've noticed the way you look at me," and the sound of their voice sent shivers down into my spine. "I've been watching you too." I felt a surge of something, panic, want, or perplexity, pulse through me as their words caused my heart to miss a beat. I was also filled with confusion. Despite the fact that this was my step-sibling, the manner in which they were caressing me and the intensity with which they were staring at me made it hard to ignore the tension that had been building up between us for several months. I stutteringly said, I don't know what you're talking about," while attempting to keep my voice firm. However, my voice came out weak and unsteady. The hand that Jake was holding on my hip became somewhat tighter, and it pulled me in a little bit closer to them. The heat of their body was now pressing softly on mine, and it was overpowering. I could feel it, and it was overwhelming. "There's no need for you to lie," they said, their lips lightly brushing against my ear in a manner that caused my breath to catch in my throat. "I know you've been feeling it too." It was impossible for me to make sense of everything that was going on around me, so I forced myself to swallow the contents of my stomach. I was being betrayed by my body, which was reacting to them in ways that I was unable to control. Although I ought to have distanced myself and put a stop to this situation before it escalated any further, I failed to do so. Not even close. There was something about the way that they were touching me and the way that they were gazing at me that made it hard for me to think clearly. I started to say something, but my voice trailed off as Jake's hand slid from my hip to my lower back, bringing me further closer to them. I was unable to finish my sentence. I was able to sense the tension that existed between us, the hidden yearning that had been building up for such a long time, and it was now coming to the surface. The tone of their voice was quiet but persistent as they said, "You don't have to say anything," Jake said. "You just have to stop pretending." The movement of their hand gently crept up my back, and their fingers traced the curve of my spine as they proceeded. At the mere contact, I experienced a chill that ran through my entire body. As the truth of what was taking place began to dawn on me, my heart began to pound in my chest, and my breath became more rapid. The situation was very genuine, it was taking place, and there was no turning back now. I made a little turn, just enough to meet their stare, and the intensity that was present in their eyes caused me to literally lose my breath. Not only was it lust or want, but there was something more profound there, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on, and it caused my heart rate to quicken even further. Jake said, "You've been avoiding me," as their eyes searched mine for any indication of resistance. However, as far as I could tell, there was none. Why? I had no idea how to respond to such question. Perhaps I had been avoiding them because I was aware that this particular time was going to come. It's possible that I chose to ignore the manner in which my body responded to them, the way in which I felt whenever they were in close proximity to me. Now, however, as I stood here with them, with their hand on my back and their breath warm on my skin, I had the impression that there was no longer any sense in denying it. I said, "I don't know," with my voice barely audible on the surface. It was the type of smile that caused a spark of energy to run through me, and Jake's lips curled into a little smile. "I think you do." Suddenly, they moved closer to me, and their lips began to lightly brush against my neck. They were playful, and I felt my entire body shiver in reaction. The kitchen appeared to vanish, and the world seemed to shrink down to just the two of us. The sensation of their lips on my skin and the heat of their body pressing against mine were the only things that remained the same. "Jake." Taking a deep breath, I was uncertain about what I was going to say, and even more uncertain about what I wanted to say. They retreated ever so slightly, just enough to glance into my eyes once more, and the intensity that they displayed was sufficient to cause my pulse to beat faster than it never had before. The words "you don't have to say anything" were spoken in a low voice. "Just let it happen." Jake moved closer to me before I could answer, and their lips came near to brushing against mine in a kiss that was timid and gentle at first, as if they were waiting for me to withdraw away from them. On the other hand, I did not. I responded by kissing them again, and my body did so before my head had a chance to catch up. As a result, the tension that had been building up between us finally broke. I felt Jake's hand slip up to the back of my neck, drawing me even closer to them. The kiss became more intense, slow, and deliberate as it progressed. I felt myself leaning into them, yearning for the touch and the intensity of the moment, as the heat that was between us was overpowering and all-consuming. The ideas that were going through my head were a maelstrom of uncertainty and desire, but none of it mattered anymore. My mind was spinning. I was only able to concentrate on the manner in which Jake was kissing me, the sensation of their hands feeling on my skin, and the manner in which my body was reacting to them in ways that I had not anticipated. We were both out of breath and trying to regain our breath when we broke apart, our foreheads resting against each other as we moved closer to each other. I could see the same mixture of feelings in Jake's eyes, which included want, perplexity, and something deeper. My pulse was still hammering in my chest, and my mind was still whirling from everything that had just occurred.